So those of you who can still remember the questions you sent in, you'll have a chance to pose them. Before I say anything, let me hear from the person or the persons who had the idea to organize this meeting and to and what is it that they're looking for, and why organize a meeting, and why this long trip, and so on. So, who is it that organized?
The culprit would be me.
Raise your voice will be.
First of all, I wanted to thank you and Professor Grace on behalf of all the brothers and sisters that came from Sacramento. Honestly, I didn't think this could ever happen, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed differently, and you responded favorably to our request, and there we are. I think that the purpose behind initiating this was not 100% clear in our minds, but I'll share with you at least the array of thoughts that contributed to it. Most of these youths are very active at our masjid up in Sacramento. They come from great families, they're well educated, most of them are still in college, and they have been enrolled in sort of a personal development program that I led for over a year now. And part of the program was to be exposed to different opinions and different approaches to the same issues that we have to muscle our way through every day. They have been exposed to my positions on many issues most of the time, and I thought that coming over here and asking you directly about some of these things would contribute to their own personal and spiritual development, and would definitely make them better students, better Muslims, and better human beings. And I think that in the back of my mind, I think that you and I are probably aligned in most of those views, and your feedback would probably contribute more authenticity to opinions I have been propagated over the past few years. But more substantially, I think most of us feel a great deal of confusion trying to reconcile the demands of modern day life in America and the requirements of our own spiritual development in a world that has completely dismissed any progressive or open-minded definitions of spirituality. And what you have presented in your writings seem to be a way out, or a breath of fresh air, or using more dramatic terms, a salvation to many of us who have been struggling with issues for so many years. We have not found anyone that was able to consolidate these thoughts in a coherent way and communicate them eloquently the way you did. So I think we're here looking for answers to things that are very important to us, that we have to deal with every single day. More self-centeredly, in my personal position as the Imam, I've always struggled between speaking my own conscience on different matters, expressing my opinion freely, and losing the very people I'm trying to help, because some of the positions I stand by are not very popular. So, and I know that this boldness on your part have cost you a lot of relationships, and maybe I don't want to have to end up doing that myself. And so, I don't know. If anyone else wants to share something with us, I would really appreciate that.
What's the age group, by the way?
All of us are between 18 and 30. I'm the outlier in the group.
I assume you're the 30.
Yes, so most of them are like
so
19,
other than
20.
you, what's the oldest?
21, 22.
Okay. By the way, these honorable-looking people, this side are all my graduate students. Some current, some former, or just friends, namely Joshua. Yes, I understand what you're talking about. Let me just say at the start that as I hope will become clear as evening goes along, there are people that work among the masses and the validity or the sense of validity to a good measure depends on how the masses respond to their message. I feel comfortable saying that was a stage in life that I have transcended. Put simply, I'm not a popularist. I really do not care very much what people of any age think of me or my work. Whether I have supporters or not have supporters, it's all the same to me. These are the stages of life and stages of consciousness and stages of awareness that you might go through, you might not go through. And so part of that is I talk to non-Muslims with a particular message. With Muslims, I engage in a transparent conversation. But كل مؤهل لما خلق لها. Each of us is, God created us for different purposes, and we have to work within the purposes that God created us for. And so I normally now do not work among the youth. This has an advantage, of course, and a disadvantage. The disadvantage is that you might become outdated as you drift away from the concerns of the youth and so on. The advantage, though, is that you have the benefit of distance and perspective. You've seen there are every moment of time we're presented with issues and challenges, and each moment we think the challenge or the issue we're presented with is the beginning and end of everything. But as you go on in life, you discover that the excitement which each challenge elicited in you was a very temporary moment in time, and looking at it in hindsight, you get a sense for what seemed important but is really not that important, and what seemed unimportant really is critical. So I apologize beforehand that some of the youth here will not understand what I'm saying and will have no clue what I'm talking about, and that's fine. It might take you years to get to the point where you can, or you might never get there. That's up to you and your own initiative. Some of you will connect with it and will understand it and will those of you who've come here looking for clear-cut, simple, straightforward, black and white answers to to questions, you don't find it with me, because I'm not privy to God's truth, and I don't pretend to, and I don't perform that role. I can only speak as to what my dynamics with God and with the intellects that have sought after God have led me to, but you take it for whatever it's worth. Part of this is that I will let me take a step back and tell you something that perhaps tries to get to the roots of the questions that you've asked. Many of the questions are the typical, I would say, conventional type of questions that young Muslims have growing up, not just in this country but in our modern world, in this world, period. And some of them are the same questions that people your age have been raising, each for their time and period, each for their age. But we must differentiate between questions that arise from intellectual curiosity and those that arise from intellectual restlessness, and those that arise from spiritual restlessness. Often we human beings do not know what drives a particular line of questions. We might pretend that what drives us is intellectual curiosity, but what we actually are driven by is intellectual restlessness. A sense of confusion about right and wrong, or about fact versus non-fact. At times we think we are raising questions about right or wrong, fact or not fact, but really our questions are emanating from the restlessness of the soul. We are in ourselves are plagued by anxieties, by fears, by worries. We think we exist in equilibrium with our world one day, the next day we don't. We feel excited one day, the next day we're bored. We struggle between extremities of boredom, certitude, confusion, happiness, depression, tranquility, fear and anxiety. Now, why is it important to differentiate these? Because you cannot truly jump. Each is as if a bowl of some form. And if you take the bowl that is made of a restless soul, a spirit not at peace, and you pour into it questions that deal with intellectual restlessness, the end product is zero-sum game, if not negative. The same for intellectual restlessness. The same for intellectual curiosity. In other words, if you do not diagnose what is it that is aching you, what is it that is motivating you, what is it that is making you wander, seek, the response often will only aggravate your condition, will either not help or just aggravate your condition. And this is a critical point. Many of the youth in this country and all over the Muslim world, because of the period that we Muslims collectively are going through, will ask questions that seem to be factually oriented. But this is like putting the cart before the, what is that expression? The horse. Because a lot of times the questions, the sort of intellectual questions that they ask about, well, for instance, can we listen to music or not? Or about hijab, or about without first dealing with the most basic and elementary issue, and that is your fundamental and quintessential relationship with Allah, and your relationship with yourself, and your relationship with your world. No matter what response you get, it will either not help you or even quite often lead you even further astray, where you avoid dealing with problems of the self by grasping on to what I've called grasping on to trying to remember the word affectations of knowledge. There's a wonderful passage by Ibn Taymiyyah. He talks about how he has experienced in his life people who are beset by anxieties, fears, boredom, basically personal problems, and that how the more the restless their soul becomes, the more they grasp on, the more they claim facts, the more they define their identity around factual issues, and therefore constantly cover up or avoid dealing with their own internal dynamics, their own restlessness. First and foremost, you've come this long trip not to find data. In this day and age, you could get data from books, from computers, from recordings, and in this day and age, doing the journey, going on a journey on rihla, to collect material in the way our forefathers used to do, where they traveled for months to collect certain data about hadith or historical incidents and so on. In our day and age, it's actually much more difficult, because the migration, the journey that you are required to take is not a physical journey anymore, but an intellectual journey. The exertion, the physical exertion is nothing. The intellectual exertion is everything. And so my obligation is to tell you something that is at least honors the intellectual exertion that you have invested. The way to dishonor it is to give you data that you could easily get from books or recordings and so on. And the way to honor a human being is to deal with their realities. So the proper way of reacting to this is to read your auras, your spirits, and to say something that responds to what I'm reading. Know that quintessentially our religion is not about simply surrendering your physical manifestations. It is not about simply surrendering your physicality, your body. Any animal can be taught to surrender their body. God didn't create in you an intellect, a conscience, a remarkable majesty of creation just to have you act like a compliant animal. Our religion as well is not about power dynamics. It's not about who you can claim authority over and who can claim authority over you. People don't need religion to do that. You don't need any sense of enlightenment to do that. People by their nature are drawn to power and manifestations of power. Remember as well that Islam was the religion of Adam and Ibrahim before it was the religion of Muhammad ﷺ. As the Quran and Allah says, when addressing Christians, it said, why do you debate us about Ibrahim? And Ibrahim was not a Nasrani, but was Muslim. He was a Muslim. So you're talking about a faith that is primordial, perennial, a faith that cannot be summed up in a set of physical manifestations or activities. I'm not saying that they're not that rituals are not important. In fact, they're the key. But if your mind and your heart longs to know nothing but the performance of rituals, then Islam has not penetrated either your mind or your heart. Allah tells us that fundamentally, lima yad'u Allah, what does Allah invite us to? And the Quran answers this quite clearly and says, Lidar as-salam, to the abode of peace. And note here, it could have very well said Lidar al-Islam, but it didn't. Lidar as-salam, to the abode of peace. The abode of peace is not a territorial, it's not a geographic, and it's not a political, and it's not a social condition. It is fundamentally a spiritual state. How can you exist in an abode of peace or not exist in an abode of peace? How do you know whether you are in abode of peace or you're not in abode of peace? What is the difference? Put it different. What is the difference between you when you ask a question about do's or don'ts, between whether you can listen to music or whether hijab or whatever, and an Orientalist scholar, a non-Muslim scholar, asking the same question? Here is where we start with the elementary steps: the restlessness of the soul, the restlessness of the intellect, and then the intellectual curiosity. Many of us, the hardest of these to satisfy is which? Restlessness of the soul, right? The easiest is intellectual curiosity. You need only be a good researcher or an intelligent person to satisfy your intellectual curiosity. But the hardest to satisfy, the most challenging, is the restlessness of the soul. But many of us, when I say of us, I say in the Muslim world, in our current condition as Muslims, we sidestep the issue of the restlessness of the soul and go directly either to intellectual restlessness or to intellectual curiosity. But intellectual restlessness can never start to anchor itself on any serious foundations. In other words, you cannot start treating intellectual restlessness without first treating the restlessness of the soul. As many philosophers in the West now say that the problem with modern man or the modern human beings is that their lack of rootedness or their rootlessness, their lack of being anchored. After all, the intellectual restlessness has come back to the issue of the foundations for the soul. And so if you are current on philosophical discourses, you discover that many Western philosophers have returned back now to questions of spirituality and re-raising the issues of spirituality. And of course, they try to find a way to fulfill spirituality without submitting to religion, which of course in my opinion is futile. But nevertheless, it's something that even if you just study human history, you will find that it is a constant pattern. Intellectual restlessness has no cure unless you first address the fundamental ailment of the restlessness of the soul. Well, first, let's explore the idea of Dar es Salaam, the abode of peace. Is it possible for a human being to exist without anxiety, without fears, without boredom? Is it possible for a human being to exist in an affirmative state of tranquility? If you notice, let's differentiate between